Now I want to zoom out a little bit again and ask you about humanitarian intervention has gotten a bit of a reputation as a female pursuit. You know, and so Obama in the Libyan intervention was portrayed as being henpecked by his female advisors, and this was all over the press. And you wrote this great rebuttal. So I wanted to ask you about it while you were here, both about that sort of sector of foreign policy as being cast female, and then also about being, you know, a foreign policy, a female in this field, and how you've seen it change.
For a while there, and maybe again, Susan Rice, Secretary Clinton, Samantha Power, and occasionally yours truly were being identified as, I think one called us, Amazon Valkyrie warmongers, which, as somebody said, might make a great name for a rock band. But the first thing that frustrated me was many of the people who are writing these things were the same journalists who had come to my office in the State Department and said, why do you keep focusing on development and empowerment of women around the world and health and technology, you know, all these soft issues, and essentially saying why isn't Secretary Clinton, you know, championing more traditional guns and bombs issues? What is this? With it wasn't even the subtext, it was the text. You know, this is all peripheral to real foreign policy. And one of the things I think Secretary Clinton has done that I am proudest to have been a part of, and that I think will have the longest implications for how American foreign policy evolves, has been to elevate development. And by elevating development, what you mean is you're not just looking at governments, you're looking at society. You're looking at the conditions that affect society, whether that's health, and that of course has a lot to do with whether we end up, how we combat a global pandemic, whether that's climate change, whether that's empowering women, which in turn is educating families and strengthening economies. There are very good reasons to do all those things as a foreign policy matter, and Secretary Clinton has worked that side of the street as hard as she's worked negotiating with Iran or working with China or thinking about what to do in North Korea, any of the more traditional issues. That perspective, which on the one hand leads you to be thinking about things like cook stoves and food security and water supply and all the things we worried about, also makes you think 60% of the population of the Middle East is under 30. This is the society we are now having to engage. These are the people who are now in the streets. We should help them. So it was all of a piece, and it wasn't bleeding hearts and it wasn't morality, although I have no problem standing up and again saying, look, we are the United States of America. Where we can, you know, there are places we're never going to intervene, but where we can, we should live for our value. We should stand up to our values. But it was really also this broader perspective that I think what's the other thing that unites all of us? Well, Susan Rice has been working on development issues for a long time. So is Samantha Power. Samantha Power is not just the author of A Problem from Hell. She has also been working very hard in the White House on a whole set of these kinds of issues. And we were looking at the Libya intervention, not just in terms of oil, not just in terms of Libya's strategic position, and not just in terms of the military costs of having to pull possibly weapons out of Afghanistan, but in terms of this larger picture of society.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then the second question is, how have things changed for women in foreign policy?
Not enough.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really quite extraordinary, actually. We've had 3 women secretaries of state, which is amazing. I grew up in Virginia in the 1960s, and the idea that there would be 1 woman secretary of state, much less 3, just extraordinary. And for the younger women in the audience, it's impossible to let you know just how much change has happened over my lifetime. That's great. I am still very often one of 1 or 2 women in any national security conference. And again, much as I try, Secretary Clinton tries, others women have tried to broaden the agenda, there's still a sense that the real stuff is the core national security guns and bombs. And again, that's very important. I wouldn't say it isn't for a minute, but I think other things are equally important. And in that world, you are still hearing mostly male voices. Just check out any panel on television or in conferences, and you are, where there are women, they're likely to out-tough the guys. Because if there's one or two women in a situation like that, you are not going to hear them talk about development and humanitarian intervention. You're going to hear them be as tough as they can possibly be. So it's not until we get a critical mass of women and men that you will get a full range of perspectives. And again, this is not like all men are going to think this way and all women that way, far from it. But I do think there are some pretty general differences in how men and women look at the world, at least as we've been socialized now. And I think we should have that full perspective represented in the US government, on every peace negotiation team. It makes a really big difference when women are at the table, from Northern Ireland to many more localized conflicts where you would expect the full range of issues to be raised and a full set of perspectives to be brought to bear.